What's up, guys? Welcome back. We have been teasing recently that we may have another guest on this month's show, and look, we have it. We have a new guest on our podcast this month. We've been on a kind of like tour of producers and engineers and stuff over the last few shows, from kind of all over. But on our last episode, or the one before we did our mid-year list, we had Lewis Johns on, and we kind of spoke about like the kind of level of talent in the UK right now, as being like one of the best out there at the moment. And one man we've mentioned quite a few times during our reviews is not only the bassist, backing vocalist in UK doom band Conan, but producer at Skyhammer Studio, and also works at Folk Studios in Wales. Mr. Chris Fielding, how are you doing, sir?
Hello, very good, thank you. Thanks for having me on.
No problem at all. It's a pleasure to have you on the podcast. You've been on our list of people we really want to chat to for a while.
A list makes it sound so intimidating. Like it's like from Kill Bill or something like that. You know what I mean? You know, take out Black Mamba, interview Chris Fielding. You know what I mean? It's like, I think what we've found is like we used to do interviews and stuff on an iteration of a podcast years ago, and it was always bands we spoke to, and it was always kind of the same conversation you got from bands, and it was generally what you know yourself playing in a band. It's like life on the road. It's it's what albums you've been listening to recently, what you work at, what's coming out. It's those sorts of things, and I think this time around with the podcast, we found that we're not that I'm saying that you guys are unsung behind the desk, but there's just a lot more things we can ask.
Okay, yeah. Well, hopefully,
someone who produces music. So I'm excited for this one because it does feel like over the last while, anyway, we've been listening to a lot of stuff that got your fingerprints all over them. So.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, yeah.
Sure, but even
hopefully it won't be. Oh, sorry. Yeah, I was going to say hopefully the answers won't be too boring.
No, we like the more detail you get, like Kyle. Like, I don't know if you can see him. He's got like lights and faders and everything behind him, so he will literally just be like, as long as we can see both his hands above the camera line, we'll be all right. Thank you, Kyle.
Correct. Now I've got to do this for the entire goddamn bit.
The whole recording, please. The whole recording.
Yeah, Duncan and I started another review site way back in 2012 called Rock and Roll Reviews, and that's when we were actually kind of first introduced to your work via Conan, basically, when we first heard Monos. But I actually didn't realise how far back your like production work actually went. Monos was like 2012, but like previously you'd worked with other bands like Latitudes and Winterfylleth and Primordial and stuff like that as well. When did this, like, when did it all start for you, and what kind of made you get into the production in the first place?
I mean, basically, it was I've always kind of had two sort of interests: the sort of geeky technical stuff. You know, when I was a kid, the first things I got into was like I was just obsessed with cars and that sort of stuff, and I wanted to be I wanted to do engineering. Mechanical engineering or whatever. That's from when I was a kid. That's what I wanted to do. Obviously, as I went through school and that sort of stuff, the further I sort of went through school, the more I realised you needed to just work really, really hard at maths to get down that road. And although I was all right at maths, I was okay, but it was never something that particularly grabbed my interest or anything like that. But at the same time, I was always got into music from a young age, through my parents first, to sort of like listen to 70s rock and that sort of stuff, and then when we went to secondary school, just started, because I was always crap at football, so sure, like all my primary school, all my mates wanted to play football, and I was always like tried to play, and then I was just naturally shit at it. And then when I went to secondary school, there was like a load of lads with like long hair, and they listened to Nirvana. I was like, these guys are like, these guys are like for me sort of thing. So I got into music then, heavily into playing the guitar and that sort of thing. But I never realised that there was ever a potential career in that sort of thing. It was just a passion that I just thought was unattainable, until one day one of my teachers just happened to mention that there was one of his pupils was a sound engineer, and it was just like a light bulb kind of coming on. Like, I didn't realise it was a job, that you could record music, be that side of the glass. I had no concept that was a thing, and it was just, I basically just thought, well, all right, well, that's what I'm going to do, So from that moment on, I just decided I was going to do that. And I went to uni in Leeds, and did the Leeds Met, as it was then. It's now Leeds Beckett University, but did a degree in that, and it was a sandwich degree. So after 2 years, I did a placement, and I worked in a studio in Ellesmere Port, sort of near Chester. So I grew up in Chester, and I sort of blagged a job there with the owner, a guy called Ian Lewis, and I sort of worked for him for like a year, just kind of like initially making tea and stuff like that, and just helping and then plugging things in and whatever, until it got to a point where I could do some stuff. And then he started letting me record some things with him, kind of like overseeing me. And then when he realised that I could just run a session for some dreadful shit thing that he couldn't be bothered to do, or he was also in a band as well, so he was doing a lot of gigs. So when if he realised that he could let me do the shit stuff, and I was like all keen and would love to do it, and then obviously if he had a gig as well, he could let me do something. He could so that's when I sort of started. That was when I was about, started properly working in the studio. So I was probably like 20 then, 20, 21. And then I went back to uni, finished my degree, and then I went back there again and was working for Ian for a few months. And but he encouraged me to sort of like apply to some other studios and things like that. So I just I managed to get a list. This is sort of early 2006. So the internet was not what it is now. You didn't have it on your phone, that sort of stuff. So I managed to find a list of all the recording studios in the UK, with their sort of addresses and that sort of stuff. And I just sent a letter, sort of job up, sort of my CV type thing, and cover letter, and a CD with like just a compilation of like 30 odd tracks of stuff that I'd worked on, to literally every single studio in the country, from Abbey Road to whatever. And I only got one reply back. Yeah. I got two replies. One reply was just a polite thanks very much, but we don't have any, and then the other, I got a phone call, and it was from Dave Anderson, who is built and established Foal Studio in mid Wales, and Foyle as it's actually pronounced, but he just rang me up and said, I think I've got a job for you, when can you come down? I said, well, I'll come down now. And he's like, oh great. So I drove down, and I was there for 6.5 years. So I basically just never left. I sort of lived there, lived in his house for 4.5 years, in the spare room. Yeah. And then after 2 years, I moved just down the road. I sort of rented a tiny little place, and so I started working there in March 2006, and straight away, because Foal always had a, through Dave's sort of history and everything, it always had a kind of history of kind of heavy rock music and guitar music and that sort of stuff. So, which obviously was, just kind of like a look for me, because that's the music I've always been into. Pretty soon after I started working there, Napalm Death came down to record, I think it was a Smear Campaign album. With their producer Russ Russell, who produced and engineered all their stuff. So Russ he'd already booked that session like before I even got the job there. So David told me, he said, look, Napalm Death come in, but Russ, I don't need you to work that session, because Russ does everything. And I sort of said, well, think he'd mind if I just came down anyway. And he goes, well, you have to ask him yourself. So I got in touch and said, hello, you don't know me, but I started working at Foal. He thought, okay, yeah. So he let me come down, and I basically just sort of helped on that session, and that was like 4 weeks, I think. So I was, I've been working there a few months, and I was already, but by the end of that session, Russ was sort of letting me do stuff, and not real, just letting me help him, just assistant engineer,
Yeah.
But I was just soaking up everything he was doing like a sponge, and it was just fantastic experience to be able to do that then. And then I just, just the more sessions I did, producers would come, and I would engineer for them or assist or both. And I'd just pick up little bits of information here and there, and just oh, that's a good idea, or cool, he does that, oh, that's good, that sort of thing, and just and then I worked there, through basically all my, well, from 24 or 23, 24, whenever I started working there, up until I was 30. And I just worked there pretty much every day. And I'd do some days ridiculous hours, like 18 hours a day and that sort of thing. And never saw my mates and all that stuff. But I just loved it. I loved it. Loved doing that. And it just, it was great fun,
Yeah. So do you still go back and use Folk Studios, or is it just solely Skyhammer now?
No. So Skyhammer. So after I left Foal, I initially moved to London. All right. It's a long story, but that didn't really work out. So, but at the same time, John from Conan. So I'd known John since we first started working together in 2009 when Conan came to do Horseback Battle Hammer. So I wasn't in the band then. John had contacted me before because he'd heard stuff I'd done, and my old band done a split with Slomatics in about 2008, and so he'd got in touch saying he had a band and he wanted to record. Blah blah blah. Anyway, eventually he came down. We did Horseback, and then we did the Slomatics split, Conan 1. Then we did Monos. And then I left in end of 2012. But he'd found this property that he was wanted to buy, and it had this large outbuilding behind it, and he'd sort of said to me that he wanted to maybe use it as a practice room or something like that for Conan. And then he looked into getting it a quote for the soundproofing and all that sort of stuff, and the cost of it was a lot more than he was expecting to do. So he thought, well, maybe if I'm going to have to spend this money doing this, maybe I could turn it into a studio. And so he contacted me again. I'm thinking of building a recording studio. What mixing desk should I buy? What? And I was like, bloody hell, that's quite a jump from I'm just going to build a practice room, now I'm going to build a recording studio and all that sort of stuff. So initially I thought he was completely mad. But then, I moved to London, and then that didn't really work out. So I had all the gear, I had all the, recording studios worth of equipment, and I suddenly didn't have a premises anymore. So I thought, oh, hang on a minute, John's doing this now. Maybe I can. Just thought. So I sent him a message and said, I've got a mad idea. Chance having a chat, and he was, yeah, sure. So I rang him up and said, look, how do you fancy doing this together? Because if you're going to build this place, I can just move my stuff in, and we can be open and running from day one. I've got clients that now I can't record in this place that I had rented. And he was like, brilliant, yeah, let's do it. So we did that. But Skyhammer actually closed in when did it close? About 3 years ago now. Basically, the property, so the property was at his house, but he had them with his now ex-wife. So they got divorced, and that property was sold. So that's the end of the studio. So John's now remarried now to the lovely Sarah. So that's the end. That was the end of Skyhammer. But
right, okay.
So what I ended up doing was I ended up using Foal now as a freelance So Mike now, who owns the studio. So my original boss Dave, he sold the studio a few years ago to a chap called Mike Bew. And so Mike now runs it now, and he lives there and everything. And so I just bring my bands there on a freelance basis. But my wife and I and my two boys, we live just down the road now. We moved here just before, 2020, January 2020, just before lockdown and everything. So yeah, we live down here as well now. So so that's the sort of a condensed but still kind of long-winded backstory to my
you've
career
literally
so far.
like the internet appears to be like grossly out of date on info, so I'm glad we got that. I thought Skyhammer was still open.
Yeah,
yeah. I mean, it's part. I mean, basically, because obviously the Facebook page, which is called Skyhammer. So I have my own sort of like producer Facebook page just under Chris Fielding, but I just kind of stopped using that. But that's still there. So we're just using the Skyhammer one. And I just never got around to changing the name on it. I changed it on my Instagram, but I just don't use Facebook anymore now at all. I mean, my account's still there. I just don't use it. I don't log into it or anything on my phone or all that sort of crap. So, but the Facebook page is still there.
And change your name to Skyhammer.
Well, yeah, we could do that. Yeah. But I did. Yeah, I mean, I was kind of thinking, do I need, a name for like my studio? We're in my studio now, which is in my house. So in top of my house, we've just got my studio where I do all my mixing and everything, which will give you a sort of slight guided tour with the laptop. Here we are. Yeah. So
right. Yeah. Hands up, Kyle. Thank you.
And then a lot of massive dart throwing posters over there as well. So in case I need some inspiration on production, just think Transylvanian Hunger. Yeah, cool.
So from your perspective, from your perspective, because we generally, when we've spoken to producers in the past, they're still active in playing bands, but those bands are for fun. You know what I mean? They're they occasionally gig where they can, but it's not like the second job, so to speak. It's not like something that's a dueling concern. From your perspective, you are, you produce music and you are full-time bass player in Conan, as well as doing the recording and production on that. How is that to juggle? Because when you're, we also hear quite a lot from producers who when their bandmates are like, "Oh, you could just record this," and no, I don't want to do that, because that's going to be hassle, and you're encroaching in my world, and that, I keep that world separate. How do you juggle that, and how does that work?
I mean, sometimes it can be a bit tricky. I mean, I generally operate on a kind of first come first serve basis in terms of I mean, luckily sort of Conan and studio work is booked normally roughly the same kind of length in advance, so I can normally juggle sessions and tours and gigs and that sort of stuff. Sometimes if I've had a session booked in the studio for a long period of time, and especially if I can't just budget, because normally people, it's not that often that easy to move a session, because obviously it's however many members of the band, they've all taken time off work and all that sort of stuff. So if suddenly there's a gig and I'm sort of double booked, then generally I would just sort of miss out on the gig. So we've got, there's a guy, Dave Riley, who used to play in the band Fudge Tunnel. He's been filling in for me on gigs that I can't do sort of for the last kind of 2.5 years now. So so occasionally, if something I can't do, then Dave fills in for me. So that means, obviously the Conan still gets to play the gig. But yeah, generally I'm kind of able to kind of manage the sort of the two. I mean, the difficult thing now is I've got two boys now. So the youngest one, he's only 2 months old. Was 2 months tomorrow, but our oldest one is 3 next month as well. But the juggling kind of like being away on tour and then being busy in the studio obviously puts a lot of pressure on my wife if I'm away all the time. So I mean, obviously with the last kind of few years with all sort of like gigs being cancelled and everything like that, I haven't really had to worry about that. But it's we've got quite a lot of stuff coming up now, so that's going to be that'll be another thing to kind of another little pressure, whatever. But
from a recording point of view as well, then. So in terms of, because you're a member of that band, when you are sitting down to record, like, so obviously there's a Conan album like imminent. When you're sitting down in the initial part of even writing music for that, are you guys already discussing about how you want that to sound recorded, or is it a case of John and the rest are quite happy, they've worked with you before in the past, that side of things is kind of, we're going to work on writing the music, but when it comes to that recording bit, you do your thing?
Essentially, yeah. I mean, John and Johnny have, always just happy just from, they trust me to do my job and do what I do. And to be honest, I've never recorded as an artist with anyone else other than myself. I've always recorded myself. So it's definitely more stressful to have to do everything, from the kind of like being involved in the initial writing to the playing to the sort of self-critiquing as you're playing, especially if you're doing like getting sort of drums down and stuff like that. So I'll be playing, listening to the drums, trying to like also not like race or whatever, all that sort of stuff, and thinking about the sound and worry about like is the tuning on the drums okay, or the mics, are they in the right place, all that sort of stuff. And then so it's definitely, there's more to think about than just simply being the guy that's recording the music, but yeah, I mean, I kind of said it because I've never had been engineered by another engineer or producer or anything like that. I don't really know anything different really. So from that side of things, it's kind of it's okay. I'm kind of used to it by now. But I also I think I'm a bit too much of a control freak anyway in terms of the sound. So I think I'd find it quite difficult to kind of like let go and fully sort of just be like, right, I'm just a bass player now, I think I find that a bit tricky really, but it's
I was a session bassist on an EP that got released last year with a few people, and I don't know what the fuck the engineer was thinking, and when he did my bass tone I was like, what have you done?
Be able to unplug, Kyle. You'd be able to unplug from it.
I was probably replaced by the guitarist, I know.
Nice. Listening to like, sorry, on you go.
Oh no, sorry, no, it's
I was just going to say, listening to like all the different kind of work you've done over the years with different bands, like it sounds to us, even as we're discussing them for review and stuff, that each album that you work on is almost like is kind of tailored to suit that band's sound, rather than just like having the same kind of set of presets and like just kind of blanket sound that some producers do, which is fine. What I would just wonder, like, what's your kind of thought process going into like a session like with a brand new band? Like, is it like a kind of blank canvas and you're just gonna see what works, or do you have a rough idea in your head of how you hear the kind of album sounding at the end stages?
I'll generally, I'll always talk with a band, either before, we get into the studio or even just, as we're setting up, what it is, how is it you want to sound, basically, in terms of like, do you want it to sound like big and live and roomy? Do you want it to sound tight and in your face, or do you want it to sound, dense and all that sort of stuff? And, but generally you can kind of, I mean, a lot of the time you can sort of second guess kind of how a band wants to sound. I mean, obviously, sometimes you can be proven wrong, but most of the time, just from kind of like the sort of influences that they've got, and and then when we're tracking as well, when we're doing initial tracking, I like to, a lot of the time, it's good to to record a band and just get like stuff down live, even if it's being done, even if everything else is going to be done afterwards. With a click, to have some sort of live guide, guitars and bass and all that sort of stuff, just so that you can kind of hear, I can hear how the songs are kind of supposed to sound before we start putting overdubs down and that sort of stuff. I mean, generally, most bands I record will be, you do it in the kind of like, right, we're getting drums now, and then we're getting guitars and bass and vocals and that sort of stuff afterwards. But even if you get stuff tracked initially just to get a vibe, then that that can help me and help them, and it just silly things as well, like just making sure that they might have say, we know we want to do it to a click, we know what the tempos are. I'm like, okay, great, so I'll put it in, and then when I hear them all playing, I'll be like, get to a section and just feel like they're pushing against the click, or they're dragging or whatever. And maybe it's just that section just needs to be changed by just a couple of BPM or whatever, or it needs to sort of ramp up slightly into a thing just to give it a little bit more, make it feel a bit less stiff. And you'd never know that if you just went and just like, right, this is the tempo, right, record to this, until it was kind of too late, maybe, but kind of check. Sort of short answer to that, I can kind of work anyway where it pleases the band, and there's no like one way to do anything, but there are ways that I do like to work, which I can suggest to someone. But if they want to work any way that suits them, I'm generally pretty flexible. I've gone all around the house there with that answer, but there's lots of different ways of doing something. But also, I suppose at the end of the day, a band sounds like themselves, and you can do as certain bands will always sound like that, regardless of who's recorded them. I mean, obviously the tone and the production styles will obviously influence a band, but certain bands just have a sound. Like Conan has a sound before I joined the band, and that's down to the way John writes and plays guitar and his voice and everything. So other bands like Boss Keloid and bands like that, they've just got a sound. So I impart a sonic kind of quality to the bands I work with and stuff like that, but I'm not going to be able to or want to change the way a band sounds anyway. I can just hopefully make them sound as good in this recording as they can at that time. That's basically
that Boss Keloid album is the Boss Keloid album from last year. The production on that, like, I think we were still talking about it at the end of the year. It's just been absolutely mind blowing. Like every nuance of the sound is there. Like you can pick out like even the minutia detail on like a drum hit. It's absolutely nuts. How long does something like that take to craft from your, like, because they'll obviously have the songs written, they'll come to you, but in terms of actual recording, that like your work effort time put into that, how long does something like that take?
I mean, well, first of all, they're a great band, like a great band to work with. Great guys, obviously, hilariously funny. Like I always love working with them in the studio. It's always a great laugh. But in terms of playing, they're all of them top musicians, and they all bring, something. Each one of them brings a key element to the sound of the records. I think though when we did that album, I think we probably had 8 days tracking, I think, in the studio, and then 4 days mixing, which we did in here. The guys came up and we sort of all mixed. So we're all on top of my house. My little studio is quite, it's quite small, so we managed to squeeze everybody in. But they stayed up at the studio whilst it's sort of in the day. So I'd work on the stuff in the day, kind of go through the kind of like laborious process, and then when I had something ready, I'd send a message. They'd come down sort of in the evening, and then we'd go through the stuff. So that was quite a nice way of working. Normally when I'm mixing, I mean, I generally, because obviously the studio's in my house as well, and the way it's just easier for me to mix remotely generally most of the time. I'll mix remotely, and then I'll send the guys the tracks. They can listen to it in their own time, come back to me with notes, and then we go back and forth like that until happy. But Boss Keloid really wanted to be in the studio with me whilst we were mixing it. And yeah, I mean, their input and them being here for that album definitely is one of the sort of, the key. We all worked to get it how they wanted it to sound and everything. All worked very hard on it. And but yeah, I mean that album is just it was a joy to work on, really. It's just a great. The songs are all amazing, and it was such a creative process in the studio as well, just coming up with, obviously I had all the stuff written, the main parts, but then it's just all the overdubs and the harmonies. Steve, the drummer, he came up with a lot of that, and just trying stuff in the studio, just putting things down and just building up like that. And it was great. But yeah, it was, I think 8 days tracking, 4 days on the mix, and then
it's insane.
It.
That's fucking insane. It sounds like, honestly, it's one of those things where when you're listening to it, it's so easy, I think, to. It's why, like I say, we enjoy like chatting to producers and people that master music and mix music, because it's one of those things that I think is so easily just to gloss over in favour of the music, which, I mean, that's how you're supposed to listen to music. But when you critique things, and the majority of our reviews, I would say 50% is maybe 60% is on the actual songs themselves, but 40% is on listen to how great this Sim's been captured. And like Dave said in his intro there, I feel for whatever reason, like in the last couple of years, just the quality of songwriting across the kind of heavier genres, all those little subgenres, and that quality's got a lot better. Bands just seem to be a lot more confident in what they're doing. But I think a lot of that also comes down to the people that bands are choosing to work with. There's a really good stable of really good producers in the UK just now who seem to be able to sit down with bands with a wide berth of Sims and capture a sound that almost feels like one that, like, no, this is the sound that was always meant for you, and and that's kind of where it landed. And like I say, it was one of those ones that I think when we heard it last year, we were pretty much of the opinion if anything sounded better produced than that last year, then we were completely spoiled. But like when you look at the Conan side of things, which is the other end of the scale in terms of it's wall of sound, you know what I mean? It's like full on just wall of oppressive sound. On that scale, is that comparably about the same amount of time then to do that, or is that an easier job to do from a mixing and from a recording and just inside, or?
I mean, in terms of Conan stuff, there's nowhere near as many overdubs as on the Boss Keloid album. There's loads of stuff going on there on that. Conan's pretty straightforward. It's just, drums, bass, 2 guitars, and some vocals, and then a few sort of sprinklings of the odd kind of guitar overdub thing, and then we've got a few other kind of bits of kind of noise and effects and whatever. But I mean, this recent album that's coming out in about 2.5 weeks or something. I'm pleased with how that's come out. It was, it felt like before we went in to record it that we were woefully underprepared, kind of, which which in a way kind of we've always kind of felt like that. Obviously this last few years, like every band, has been tricky just in terms of just being able to get together and that sort of stuff. And Johnny, our drummer, he lives in Dublin, so we couldn't really just have a jam, even when things have kind of opened up a bit, because it was difficult for him to come over to the UK, because it would, his work wasn't happy about him traveling during lockdown times, and or even when things were lifting slightly and that sort of stuff. So it was just so we tried to kind of do the online stuff, and John would like record some ideas and send them over, but really Conan's a band that needs to kind of just play in a room and jam stuff out, so we had a few sort of jams here and there, and then recorded just on like an iPhone in the practice room and that sort of thing. And John would come bring some riffs and be like, we jam on something. And then and then we were like, right, we need to get an album sorted now. So we had a UK tour coming up last November, whenever it was, sort of October, November time, and we just booked the studio directly after that, because obviously Johnny coming over with taking time off work and all that sort of stuff, we're like, let's just get it booked. So we had a couple of jams around. We had a sort of jam a couple of days around the Bloodstock thing we did last year. We started jamming through some of the new ideas, and then we had a few more jams before the tour. We had a day off in the tour, so we had a jam doing that. And then when we actually went into the studio, we were kind of still thinking like, we've got hardly any material. We actually realised we actually had most of the material already kind of like gone through. It's just that it'd been done so spread out and just whatever that we actually we just kind of, it didn't feel like we had it, but we actually had a lot of the bare bones of everything. But so in that time we just recorded, we were just focusing on the drums, so it was just kind of like an intense after the tour, so we were all like fresh again from playing together for intensely for like a week and a bit. So we're kind of like chops were tightened and that sort of stuff, and and then it was just like, right, let's get in, what have we got, work on the stuff in the studio under like a lot of pressure. We've got to get it done by just in a few days, and then just like work through the songs, and just it's similar way to, well, it's actually very similar to what we did with the previous album as well, because Johnny had only just joined the band as well, so we had like a very intense sort of short kind of like writing period of stuff that was kind of in the pipeline, but just right, we're making the songs now, and just it was just going on what feels good, what flows, and just being quite ruthless with stuff that we felt didn't cuss it and that sort of thing. And then just went through and just we got the drums down in that time, and then we took it away, and then came back again about a month and a bit later to do the guitars. And in that time we kind of changed a few bits as well, so some of the riffs had kind of changed, and John was like, oh, this riff feels a bit boring, I'm going to change it up a little bit here, or add something here, and that sort of stuff. And then we got the guitars down like that. Then I worked did the bass in my own time, and then in February came down and just did the vocals, and then we were like, we've got an album, and then I mixed it over. I don't know how long I spent on the mixing really, because I kind of did it, spread it out over reasonable amount of time. But I'm pleased with how how the songs came out, but I'm also pleased with the sound of it as well. Like we're pleased with the drum sound, and it's all completely natural drum sound. No cheating with samples or any of that sort of stuff. And it's just
well, literally Kyle's bugbearer at the moment. Like he's a one-man crusade on the podcast to get every producer to stop doing things. involve it in replacing any sound at all. He's not he's not having any of it. As
put the microphone in front of the drum and press record.
Yeah, I mean, I won't lie. I've definitely will use any tool in my arsenal to make something sound good. If I feel it, even just with drums sometimes, with just adding like a kind of a room sound. You can obviously do it with like a reverb, but if you got like good samples of like a snare in a room, you can just mix that in with the natural sound, and it just can help. But didn't have to do anything like that with our latest album. And Johnny played the drums really nicely. Just using my kit, my DW kit, and my snare, my old Pearl snare, and it hit them nice and hard and nice and consistently, and that sort of stuff. And it just didn't need to do it. And guitars wise, I'm trying to think what we use on the guitars. I think we used we probably used my Sun amp, which has been on pretty much every single Conan recording since day one, more or less, apart from maybe one or two. And John's rig, which is kind of like a Mesa Boogie power amp thing with this kind of Matt amp sort of clone preamp. Use that, and a few other bits, some Marshall JC800 or JMP or whatever it was. And it's quite straightforward really, but it's come out pretty good, and I hope when it comes out properly that people are happy with it, and like it.
Yeah, I mean, we've been lucky enough to have received a copy to review, so we're in the process of we're reviewing that just very soon. So hopefully we'll have that up on the YouTube channel soon. But Duncan and I've seen like Conan on a couple of different occasions, and it's like, but still to this day, like it's one of the heaviest things like you will ever,
the heaviest gig we've ever been to,
or feel like it's just ridiculous. Like, and we've seen like fucking Slayer and Gojira and Dying Fetus and all that, and still to this day, like Conan still like wipe the floor with them.
Right, cool.
It's just
like this. We joke about it all the time, and it sounds like a made up story. But I think the first time, I'm not sure if you were even in the band at the point, but we saw them play Bannerman's in Edinburgh, which is just a giant fucking tunnel. That's all it is. It's an old whiskey vault, so it's just a giant stone tunnel, and the opening chord got played and a glass smashed. So fucking it vibrated that much, actual fucking splash. It's the only gig I've ever been to that I didn't drink and I woke up hungover the following day. It was just fuzzy, just that way where you just like everything's not quite in focus. Like my brain got rattled. It's unbelievably heavy, and the interesting thing about it as well is I think it's a lot to do with what obviously what you're bringing in the production as well, is to chart how many bands now are kind of doing that really oppressive doomy sound that are kind of piggybacking on that sound. Like I'm not even sure if John's aware of like how many bands now are trying to clone the Conan sound. There's a whole sea of them, and I'm sure there was bands in and around that sounded kind of similar before, but there's just a whole sea of them now out there with just sounds that just sound just a little bit to the side. So it's cool because it is like it's one of those things that is so monolithically heavy that I like to hear anyone try and tackle that. I don't even know where you begin with something like that.
Well, I mean, I've told the story like a few times, but obviously, as I touched on it earlier, but when Conan came, so obviously, 2009, long time before I was obviously in the band. Conan came down to record with me, and as I said, I'd been having a bit of back and forth with John in over MySpace or whatever it was. Initially, he'd asked about coming to do a demo, and I told him what the rate was, and it was kind of a little bit out of his budget at the time, just to come and do a demo. So he thought, what, get back to you kind of thing. And came and said, right, I want to just record these songs. And Conan really hadn't. I mean, I think he'd played one gig or a couple of gigs or something like that, but hadn't done anything for maybe a couple of years. And it was just a project that he had that he just did for a laugh, and he just wanted to get the songs documented, just down, so he could just have it recorded, so came down, and obviously he'd sort of saying, oh, it's kind of heavy doom stuff, and I was like, cool, okay, yeah, I know what that sounds like, sort of thing. So we just sort of set up as I do normally, and we did the Hotspot Battlehammer, the first thing, and it was done recorded, mixed and mastered in 3 days. And I just remember just tracking. The things I remember from the recording of it was just how impossible it was. Not impossible, but how near impossible it was to keep the guitars in tune, because they were tuned so low. And the strings that John had on the guitar at the time was I don't know, a set of 10s or something like that. So they were just baby hair thin, kind of. Yeah. And so it would just go completely out of tune if you put the mildest amount of pressure on. So anyone who's worked with me in the studio jokes about me telling people off for squeezing when they're tracking, because it just goes out of tune. But this was extreme. So I managed to get it recorded, and it was just as I was mixing it, we were mixing the first track, Krull, and I remember just playing it back, and sort of the guys on the sofa nodding along, and I was just and I remember turning around and saying this is fucking heavy, this is really heavy, and they were like, yeah, and I was like, no, seriously, this is I don't really think I've ever heard anything this heavy before. Yeah. And I knew then it was this is something a little bit different, and obviously I'd recorded it and I'd made it sound as heavy as I could, sort of thing, but still I was kind of surprised at how heavy it was, ridiculously heavy, especially after it, because to make it more kick in at the start, the first track, I just got a reverse cymbal and time stretched it as far as it would go, so it went horribly, kind of gives that horrible digital kind of sound. It just faded that in, so it comes in really quiet, so just to basically, so people would be like, what's this, waiting for it to kick in. It's and just turn it up really loud, thinking I'm just going to start, and then it would come and it would just and I started for a laugh. When bands came to the studio, I'd be like, have a listen to this. So I would just play it, and I would just sit there and I'd just crank it real loud, and this cymbal coming up, and you see people starting to go as it gets really loud, and then in the monitoring in Folk can get pretty loud, this Gen X with this massive sub as well. Ooh. So and I would just stand there and just wait until it kicked in with the first note, and see people's faces and so at the time I kind of realised, there's something about this band that is a bit different, and obviously ridiculously heavy. And then and within a week, I think John he had people, small labels, but kind of fallen over themselves to put it out, and it was just the band went from there and just kind of never looked back, really.
It's one of those things as well where even the description, Doom's one of those genres where, I mean, there's so many levels to it. It's been on the go for so long, but I remember even then when, and I wasn't the biggest aficionado of Doom when we heard Monos. I remember Dave saying, "Oh, we've got this band Conan, Doom," and I was like, "That, oh yeah, Blue Oyster Cult, say invite us, yeah, let's do this," and then hit play on it, and then just feeling like I just had a prolapse or something. It was the most insane thing ever. But it's one of those things where it completely, that as a term, as a genre for it completely captures that sound, and we're super excited to obviously like see the band grow, because it appears like every album, the more people seem to start to pay attention, and things are organically getting. It's not one of these things where you've released an album and then all of a sudden you're like headlining download. It feels like an organic kind of progression that more people seem to be coming onto, and that's the same with the gigs. Like the venues, like when we were at that first one, it was full of weird people, just the weirdest crowd ever. And then like the next time I saw it, like it was a fully packed venue in Glasgow, and it just like it seems to just keep going up, which I think is awesome. It's that kind of testament to hard work paying off, like not compromising, and kind of sticking to your laurels and continuing to just completely melt faces. Which I think is the best way.
I think obviously we've put in a lot of before I joined the band, but then obviously after I joined the band as well, the gigs kind of picked up even more, and we've done a lot of touring, like a lot of touring, all over the place, which has obviously been great to be able to do, but it is also hard work to do that many gigs, especially obviously hard work. It's more hard work, just like family life and all that sort of stuff, trying to juggle everything. The band, but obviously we've been privileged to be in that position where we've been able to do that much touring and just grow as a band, it's been great to be involved in all that sort of stuff, really. And I'd say Conan has it's kind of got it's sort of not niche, I suppose, but it's got a place now where it's kind of it's an established band, and you can kind of we can be fairly confident we can like book a long tour and it'd be good, and have people come to the gigs and that sort of stuff. And obviously we've done a lot of touring in North America, and we've got some more plans for that sort of stuff, but we're going to Brazil for the first time in September, just for one gig, like a festival in September. So that's going to be awesome to go down there, great to, and I've been to South America, and so that'll be pretty good. I mean, we're going to be in an airplane longer than we're going to be like in Brazil, but still really cool thing to be able to do. There's a few things in the pipeline as well to go to a few other places that we've not been to before. So that'll be great if all those sort of things come off. But we went to Japan a few years ago, and again that was just insane to be able to go out there. And again, we just went for 3 shows there and back, and so a lot of traveling, but it was amazing to be able to do that. Really, really amazing. But I do remember at one gig, I can't remember where we were playing, but it was we were one of our sort of headlining club shows, UK shows, and someone came up to me afterwards, and it was a girl who'd seen us play at Bloodstock. So this is probably the first time we played Bloodstock. We played on the Sophie stage, and we had it was great. We had a really big crowd and that sort of stuff, and the gig went really well. And she came up to us after this club show that we did. She was like, "Oh, it's amazing! It's amazing to be able to get to see you in this, in a small venue like this, And I was kind of thinking, like, this is the sort of venue we normally play, but it's just that she's seen us in Bloodstock, so she just saw us on a massive stage and just assumed that that's the sort of venues that we play to those sorts of crowds all the time, which was kind of like, I found it sort of blew me away a little bit. I kind of felt like I didn't want to sort of like disappoint her by saying like, no, we actually play these kind of like shit holes all the time, but no, it's fun to it was kind of remind me that when you do play those sorts of places, those festivals and the big things like that, there are sort of people that are not in the not necessarily aware of the kind of like the underground scene, that would never would have heard of us before, and they saw us on a different platform and just got into the band and the genre that way, which is great. So it's and that obviously all those sorts of things to still, like you say, enable the band to grow, organically and everything like that. So it's cool to do that sort of thing, But going to Brazil, that's really looking forward to that. That's going to be awesome.
That's cool. Yeah. Obviously, we mentioned the new album was out on the 19th on Napalm Records, which is, spoiler, it's very good. But aside,
Dave, I've not listened to it yet. You weren't supposed to spoil it for me.
what did you think it was going to be? Anything other than awesome, really?
I mean, like, I'd like spoiler alert is all I'm asking for just before you go in and tell me how amazing it is.
Aside from that album that's coming out in August, is there anything else that you can tell us about that you're working on or have worked on or have got coming up?
Well, I'm working on 3 different projects currently at the moment. Just I'm in the sort of mixing stage of all of them. But
cool.
So the first one is a band from Tel Aviv in Israel called Love Your Witch, who are great, kind of like.
Oh, I love that name.
Yeah, I worked with them a few years ago. 3 young lads who are great players, really lovely lads as well. Like great fun to have in the studio, and they came over again to from sunny Israel to sort of rainy mid Wales, and yeah, we did. So I'm the mixing stage of that album. It's great. It's kind of just sort of balls out, rocking, sort of heavy, stonery, bit psychedelic kind of stuff. That's really cool. So the band I'm working with, a new band called Conan, which is all the guys in that band have been sort of in other bands, but this is a new project with them, and that's it's cool. Again, it's heavy stuff. And then the project I'm working on, band from Stockport called Under. So it's quite an interesting project that we're doing. So we've done a few tracks with that, and they're a really good band. It's like really great musicians. And it's quite sort of it's kind of different from their normal stuff as well. So some of it's quite kind of like left field as well. Like, so yeah, that's what I'm literally currently working on right now.
Nice.
But yeah, I've got other things coming up, and just like my mind goes completely blank, whenever I think I want to looking at the diary, sort of stuff.
Yeah.
But
yeah. Nice, and obviously you have plenty of kind of touring and stuff going on with Conan still to come this year as well, which I hope we'll get to witness again in Edinburgh or Glasgow or wherever we can make it to. That would be awesome. So new Conan album, Evidence of Immortality, out on August 19th on Napalm Records. Check that one out. Also, if you're in a band looking to get material recorded, hit up Chris. His work is outstanding. If you've heard any of his previous albums and stuff he's worked on, I'll put some links below on the Spotify and on YouTube and stuff like that to Chris's services, so you can check him out, get in touch for details. But Chris, I think we've taken up enough of your time tonight, but thanks so much for coming on. We've been wanting to kind of talk to you for ages, so I really appreciate you coming on the show.
Well, thanks so much for having me. It's been great to talk to you all, and hope I'll get to see you sometime when I'm up north of the border and that sort of stuff. So
100%. We're getting pints.
Definitely.
Dave's buying. Dave's buying. We're getting pints. So we'll get the good stuff. If I'm buying, sketchy what's in the glass. So
nice one. Thanks very much, Chris. Appreciate it.
Brilliant. Thanks very much.